Scars tell stories. Some are visible on the skin, while others remain hidden in the heart. For Eleanor Mitchell, both kinds shaped her existence. Desperation drove her to board a ship bound for America, hoping to escape a life that had shown her little kindness. She never imagined that a man would look at her scarred face and see beauty, or that her wounded heart could learn to trust again. This is the story of how Eleanor's scars became the beginning of something beautiful, rather than the end of her dreams. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The persistent drizzle of London's autumn had seeped into Eleanor Mitchell's bones over the 26 years of her life. Standing at the docks with a single trunk containing everything she owned, she felt the familiar chill despite the woolen shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her fingers traced the rigid tissue that marked the left side of her face from temple to jaw, a habit developed over the 15 years since the fire that had claimed her family home and everyone she loved. "Final boarding for the SS Atlantic, bound for New York Harbor," the dockhand called, his voice carrying over the bustle of the waterfront. Eleanor pulled her shawl higher, partially covering her face as she always did in public. The ship loomed. Before her, massive and intimidating, the crossing would take weeks, but the distance wasn't what frightened her. It was what waited on the other side, or rather, who. 3 months ago, in an act of desperation after losing her position as a seamstress, Eleanor had answered an advertisement in the newspaper. "American gentleman seeks bride, passage paid." There had been dozens of such notices, agencies specializing in connecting women from England, Ireland, and Scotland with men in America's expanding territories. Most specified youth, beauty, good health, and childbearing capability. Eleanor possessed only one of those qualities, but necessity had made her bold. She had sent a letter describing herself honestly: her age, her skills as a seamstress and cook, her education. She mentioned the scar last, explaining it affected only her appearance, not her abilities. She included no photograph. Weeks passed before a reply arrived from Mr. Joseph Reynolds of Millbrook, a small but prosperous town in Massachusetts. His letter was brief but kind. He wrote that he valued honesty and hard work above beauty, and that he required a practical wife to help manage his household and business. He would pay her passage, and if upon meeting they found each other unsuitable, he would provide funds for her return journey or to establish herself elsewhere in America. It seemed a fair arrangement to Eleanor, whose alternatives had dwindled to the workhouse or the street. "Ticket, miss?" the ship's officer asked, interrupting her thoughts. Eleanor fumbled in her reticule for the precious document, her lifeline to a possible future. The officer barely glanced at her face as he checked the ticket and directed her toward the steerage section. The accommodations were as sparse as expected. A narrow berth in a compartment shared with 5 other women, all mail-order brides like herself. They eyed Eleanor curiously when she entered, but quickly averted their gazes when they noticed her scar. She had grown accustomed to this reaction, the initial curiosity, followed by shock, pity, or sometimes revulsion. As the ship pulled away from the dock, Eleanor stood at the rail, watching London disappear into the mist. She felt neither sadness or joy, only a numb sense of finality. The life she had known, difficult as it was behind her. What lay ahead remained shrouded in uncertainty. Over the following days, Eleanor kept mostly to herself, spending hours on deck when weather permitted, watching the endless expanse of the Atlantic. The other women in her compartment, Mary, Harriet, Sarah, Beatrice, and Jane, gradually grew accustomed to her presence. By the second week, they had progressed from awkward silence to cautious conversation. "Who's your intended then?" asked Harriet one evening as they sat on their berths, the ship creaking around them. Mr. Joseph Reynolds of Millbrook, Massachusetts. Eleanor replied, her fingers automatically reaching for her scar. A New England man, Beatrice exclaimed. My Thomas is in California, gold country. Says he's built a fine house already. My William has a ranch in Texas, Jane said proudly. 2,000 acres, he claims. The women exchanged details about their prospective husbands, their voices tinged with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Eleanor listened, offering little. Mr. Reynolds had shared few details about himself beyond his occupation as a businessman and widower with no children. Does he know about... Mary gestured vaguely toward Eleanor's face, then blushed at her own boldness. Yes, Eleanor said simply. I told him everything. The others exchanged glances. It was Sarah who finally spoke, her voice gentle. That was brave of you. Many girls don't tell the whole truth until they arrive. I wouldn't want to travel all this way only to be rejected upon arrival, Eleanor replied. Better to face disappointment from the safety of home. And yet, he still wanted. You to come, Harriet observed. That's promising, isn't it? Eleanor offered a non-committal shrug. Perhaps he's desperate, or perhaps he doesn't care about appearances. Either way, I've made my choice. The Atlantic crossing proved merciless. 2 severe storms battered the ship, sending passengers and belongings tumbling. Seasickness claimed most of the women, though Eleanor remained strangely resilient. She spent the worst nights comforting her cabin mates, holding basins and wiping foreheads with cool cloths. During one particularly violent night, as the ship heaved and groaned under the assault of massive waves, Jane became hysterical with fear. We're going to die, she sobbed. The ship will break apart, and we'll all drown. Eleanor sat beside her, one arm firmly around the younger woman's shoulders. The captain knows these waters, she said with a calmness she didn't entirely feel. This ship has made this crossing hundreds of times. But what if it sinks? I can't swim. Jane's eyes were wide with terror. Then we'll face that together, Eleanor said firmly. But for now the ship is holding, and we must hold too. Take a deep breath with me. By morning the storm had passed, and word spread through steerage about the steady woman with the scarred face who had comforted others while the sea raged. The looks directed at Eleanor changed subtly, still curious, but now tinged with respect. On the 23rd day at sea, the call went up, "Land ho, America ahead!" Eleanor joined the crowd at the rail, straining for her first glimpse of the new world. The shoreline emerged gradually from the morning mist, a promise of new beginnings. As the ship approached New York Harbor, the Statue of Liberty came into view, her torch raised in welcome. Eleanor felt a flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest. Not quite hope, but perhaps its precursor. The immigration process at Ellis Island was chaotic and intimidating. Officials barked questions in rapid English, examining eyes, ears, and throats for signs of disease. Eleanor stood in line, clutching her few documents, her heart hammering. When her turn came, the doctor paused at the sight of her scar before proceeding with his examination. Cause of facial disfigurement? He asked clinically. Fire, sir. 15 years ago. He nodded, making a notation. Any respiratory issues as a result? No, sir. After being declared healthy enough to enter the country, Eleanor collected her trunk and followed the flow of passengers toward the ferry that would take them to Manhattan. Her fellow brides had been subdued since landing, the reality of their situations settling heavily upon them. They would soon part ways, each to meet the man who would become her husband. I'm frightened, Beatrice confessed as they waited for the ferry. What if Thomas takes one look at me and changes his mind? Then you'll make another plan, Eleanor said pragmatically. You've come this far on your own strength. You won't suddenly become helpless if things don't go as expected. In Manhattan, they said their goodbyes with promises to write if possible. Eleanor watched them disperse into the bustling city, each following a different path. She stood alone, with her trunk, consulting the letter from Mr. Reynolds. He had arranged for her to take the train to Boston, where she would transfer to a smaller line that served Millbrook. He would meet her at the station there. The American trains proved faster and more comfortable than those in England, though the journey still took nearly a day. Eleanor watched the landscape transform from urban sprawl to rolling countryside. America seemed impossibly vast and varied compared to the compact familiarity of England. As the train approached Millbrook, Eleanor's composed facade began to crack. What if Mr. Reynolds was cruel or abusive? What if he took one look at her scar in the harsh light of day and rescinded his offer? She had his promise of assistance regardless, but the thought of another rejection made her stomach clench. The train whistled as it pulled into Millbrook Station, a tidy brick building with flower boxes beneath the windows. Eleanor gathered her belongings with trembling hands. The other passengers disembarked quickly, greeted by waiting family members. Soon only Eleanor remained on the platform, scanning the faces of the few people still present. A tall man approached, his stride purposeful. He was perhaps 45, with dark hair silvered at the temples and a neatly trimmed beard. His clothing was well made but understated, the attire of a successful businessman rather than a frontiersman or farmer. "Miss Mitchell?" he inquired, stopping a respectful distance away. Eleanor turned fully toward him, making no attempt to hide her scar. "Mr. Reynolds." If the sight of her damaged face shocked or repulsed him, he showed no sign. His expression remained politely neutral as he offered a slight bow. "Welcome to Millbrook. I trust your journey wasn't too difficult." "It was long but uneventful," Eleanor replied, studying him carefully. His eyes were dark brown, intelligent, with tiny creases at the corners that suggested he smiled more often than his current serious expression indicated. His hands, when he reached for her trunk, showed the remnants of calluses beneath newer softness. A man who had once worked, physically but now directed others. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "My carriage is just outside," he said, lifting her trunk with ease. "Unless you'd prefer to rest at the hotel before proceeding to the house?" "I'd rather continue, if you don't mind," Eleanor said. "I've spent weeks in transit already." He nodded and led the way to a handsome carriage where a driver waited. Mr. Reynolds handed her up before joining her inside, sitting opposite rather. Then beside her, another small courtesy she noted with approval. As the carriage pulled away from the station, Eleanor caught glimpses of Millbrook through the windows. It appeared prosperous and well-maintained, with neat shops and homes lining the streets. Trees arched overhead, their leaves just beginning to turn with the approach of autumn. "Millbrook began as a mill town, as the name suggests," Mr. Reynolds explained, following her gaze. "But we've diversified considerably in recent years. My business is in furniture manufacturing, though I have interests in several other ventures." "As well," Eleanor nodded, uncertain how to respond to this information. The practiced social conversation of her youth seemed remote and inaccessible after years of near isolation. Mr. Reynolds seemed to sense her discomfort. "I imagine you have questions about the arrangements," he said. "Please feel free to ask anything you wish to know." Eleanor gathered her courage. "In your letter, you mentioned that if we found each other unsuitable, you would assist me in returning to England or establishing myself elsewhere. Does that offer still stand now that you've seen me?" Something flickered in his eyes. Not pity, but perhaps recognition. "Miss Mitchell, I am a man of my word. The offer stands regardless of any impression we may form of each other. But if I may be direct, your scar is precisely as you described it. You were honest, and I appreciate that quality above many others." The carriage turned into a tree-lined drive, approaching a large house set back from the road. It was not ostentatious, but spoke of solid prosperity. 3 stories of red brick with white columns flanking the entrance. "Elmwood," Mr. Reynolds said as they drew closer. "My home for the past 20 years. As the carriage stopped, Eleanor steeled herself for the next challenge, meeting the household staff who would be her responsibility if she became Mrs. Reynolds. The front door opened, and an older woman in a housekeeper's dress emerged, followed by a younger maid. Mr. Reynolds assisted Eleanor from the carriage. "Miss Mitchell, this is Mrs. Parker, my housekeeper, and Lily, our housemaid. Mrs. Parker, Lily, this is Miss Eleanor Mitchell." Mrs. Parker's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Eleanor's scar, but her professional demeanor remained intact. "Welcome to Elmwood, Miss Mitchell. We've prepared the blue guest room for you." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, grateful for the woman's composure. The interior of Elmwood matched its exterior, tastefully appointed, but not extravagant. Polished wood and quality furnishings spoke of comfort rather than ostentation. Eleanor followed Mrs. Parker up the curved staircase to the second floor, where the housekeeper showed her to a pleasant room decorated in shades of blue and cream. "Dinner will be served at 7, miss," Mrs. Parker informed her. "Mr. Reynolds thought you might appreciate some time to rest and refresh yourself after your journey." Left alone, Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed. The room was larger than any she had occupied since childhood. The mattress was soft beneath her, the linens fine and smooth. A porcelain wash-basin sat on a marble-top table with fluffy towels neatly folded beside it. She rose and moved to the window, looking out over formal gardens that gave way to wilder woodland beyond. Elmwood was beautiful, peaceful, so different from the cramped, noisy lodgings she had left behind in London. Yet she felt no sense of belonging, only the wariness of someone who had learned that good fortune rarely lasted. An hour later, refreshed, from washing away the grime of travel and changed into her second-best dress, a serviceable navy blue with a high collar, Eleanor made her way downstairs. She found Mr. Reynolds in what appeared to be a study, standing before a bookshelf with a volume open in his hands. He looked up at her entrance, closing the book. "Miss Mitchell, I hope your accommodations are satisfactory." "More than satisfactory," she assured him. "Your home is lovely." He gestured toward a pair of chairs positioned near the fireplace, where a small fire took the chill from the evening air. "Please sit. I thought we might speak privately before dinner." Eleanor perched on the edge of one chair, back straight, hands folded in her lap, the posture of a governess or companion rather than a prospective wife. Mr. Reynolds sat opposite her, his manner similarly formal. "I realize our situation is unconventional," he began. "I've never been one for society's usual courtship rituals, and circumstances have made such approaches impractical for both of us. But I want to be clear about my expectations and to understand yours." "That seems sensible," Eleanor replied cautiously. "I am, as I mentioned in my letter, a widower. My wife Catherine died 8 years ago. We had no children." He paused, his expression momentarily distant. "I've built my businesses to a point where they largely run themselves, but my home has suffered from the lack of a woman's touch and guidance. I'm seeking a partner, Miss Mitchell, someone to share responsibilities and perhaps in time, affection." Eleanor nodded slowly. "May I ask why you chose me? There must have been many women who responded to your advertisement." Mr. Reynolds considered her question seriously. There were indeed many responses. Most were from very young women, barely more than girls, seeking adventure or escape. Others were clearly interested only in financial security. Your letter stood out because of its honesty and practicality. You didn't attempt to hide your scar or to compensate for it with excessive claims about other qualities. He leaned forward slightly. "I value directness, Miss Mitchell. I've had enough pretense and shallow social niceties to last a lifetime. When I read your letter, I sensed a kindred spirit, someone who sees the world as it is rather than as they wish it to be. Eleanor wasn't sure how to respond to this assessment. She had never considered her bluntness a virtue, merely a consequence of having no reason or energy for artifice. "You should know," she said finally, "that I accepted your offer out of necessity. My prospects in London were limited. I don't wish to deceive you about that." "I appreciate your candor," he replied with the ghost of a smile. "Few of us have the luxury of choices made entirely free from practical considerations. The question now is whether we might build something worthwhile from this beginning." Eleanor studied him carefully. There was nothing in his manner that raised immediate concern, no cruelty or deceit that she could detect. Yet experience had taught her wariness. "What do you propose, Mr. Reynolds?" "A trial period," he suggested. 1 month, during which you'll be my guest rather than my fiancé. You'll become acquainted with the household, the town, and me. At the end of that time, we'll both decide whether to proceed with marriage or to implement the alternative arrangements we've discussed." It was a generous offer, more generous than Eleanor had dared hope for. "That seems fair," she agreed. "Excellent." He rose as the mantel clock chimed 7. "Shall we proceed to dinner? Mrs. Parker is an excellent cook, though she'd welcome direction from a new mistress, should things progress in that direction." As they walked toward the dining room, Eleanor felt a curious lightness. For the first time in many years, she faced a future that held at least the possibility of something beyond mere survival. Mr. Reynolds, Joseph, was not what she had expected. There was a depth to him, a thoughtfulness that intrigued her. Despite her determination to remain practical, the dining room, like the rest of Elmwood, spoke of quiet elegance. The table was set for 2 at one end, with fine china and silver gleaming in the light from a crystal chandelier. As Joseph held her chair, Eleanor caught a glimpse of their reflection in the darkened window, a tall, distinguished man and a slender woman with half her face in shadow. An unlikely pair, brought together by circumstance rather than choice. Yet as they began their meal and their conversation tentatively expanded beyond practicalities to books they had read and places they had seen, Eleanor discovered something unexpected, a sense of possibility that she had thought long extinguished. Perhaps, she thought as she watched Joseph describe his travels in Europe with animated hands, there was more to this arrangement than mere convenience. Perhaps there might even be room for her scarred self to find, if not love, at least respect and companionship in this new world. The morning light streamed through the blue curtains, waking Eleanor earlier than usual. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place herself in the unfamiliar room with its high ceiling and elegant furnishings. Then memory returned. She was at Elmwood, in Millbrook, an ocean away from London's dreary confines. Eleanor rose and moved to the window. The gardens below were touched with autumn gold, a gardener already at work among the flower beds. Beyond the manicured lawns stretched woodlands painted in russet and amber. It was a scene of tranquil beauty that stirred something long dormant. Within her, a soft knock at the door announced Lily, the housemaid, bearing a tray with tea and toast. "Good morning, miss," Lily said, setting the tray on a small table near the window. "Mr. Reynolds thought you might appreciate a light breakfast before joining him downstairs at 8, if that suits you." "Thank you, Lily," Eleanor replied, noticing how the young woman's eyes flickered to her scar before resolutely focusing elsewhere. It was a familiar dance, curiosity followed by determined politeness. "Will you be needing help with your toilette?" "Or dressing, miss?" Eleanor shook her head. "I'm accustomed to managing for myself." Left alone, Eleanor sipped the excellent tea while contemplating the day ahead. Joseph had mentioned showing her around the estate and introducing her to the town. It would be her first real test, facing the curious stares and whispers of Millbrook's residents. Dressed in her best day dress, a dark green wool that complemented her auburn hair, Eleanor descended the staircase at precisely 8 o'clock. She found Joseph in the morning room, reading a newspaper while enjoying coffee and eggs. He rose immediately at her entrance. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell. I trust you slept well?" "Very well, thank you," she replied, taking the seat he indicated. A place had been set for her, and a maid promptly appeared with a fresh pot of tea and offered various breakfast dishes. "I thought we might tour the grounds this morning if the weather holds," Joseph said, resuming his seat, "and perhaps drive into town this afternoon. The dressmaker, Mrs. Wilson, is expecting us around 2 o'clock. Eleanor paused with her teacup, halfway to her lips. "The dressmaker," Joseph folded his newspaper neatly. "I hope you won't consider it presumptuous, but I've arranged for a modest wardrobe to be made for you. Regardless of how our arrangement proceeds, you'll need appropriate clothing for the New England climate and local customs." Surprise rendered Eleanor momentarily speechless. Such thoughtfulness was unexpected, especially from a man who barely knew her. "That's very generous," she finally managed, "but unnecessary. I wouldn't want to impose—" "It's not an imposition," Joseph interrupted gently. "Consider it practical necessity rather than extravagance. Our winters are far harsher than London's, and social expectations here may differ from what you're accustomed to." Eleanor wanted to protest further, but recognized the logic of his argument. Her meager wardrobe was indeed inadequate for her new circumstances, whether temporary or permanent. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll repay your kindness when I'm able." Something like amusement flickered in his eyes. "Let's set aside talk of repayment for now. We have a month to determine the nature of our future relationship. In the meantime, practical matters take precedence." After breakfast, they toured the grounds together. Elmwood encompassed nearly 30 acres, with formal gardens giving way to orchards, kitchen gardens, and woodlands. A small lake glimmered beyond a gentle slope, and Joseph spoke of ice skating there in winter months. "Catherine loved the gardens," he remarked, as they walked along a gravelled path bordered by late-blooming roses. "She designed much of what you see here, though I've maintained it rather than added to it since her passing." It was the first time he had mentioned his late wife without prompting. Eleanor studied his profile, noting the softness that entered his expression. "She must have had excellent taste," Eleanor offered cautiously. Joseph nodded. "She did. In all things." He paused beside a white rose bush. "But the past remains in the past. What matters now is the present, and potentially the future." They continued their tour, Joseph pointing out various buildings: the stables, the carriage house, the gardener's cottage, and the small greenhouse where herbs and tender plants were cultivated year-round. Eleanor listened attentively, storing away details that might prove useful if she were to become mistress of Elmwood. At the far edge of the property stood a modest chapel with a small cemetery beside it. "The Reynolds family chapel," Joseph explained, "built by my grandfather. The family plot is there." Eleanor followed his gaze to a marble headstone larger than the others. Even from a distance she could make out the name, Catherine Reynolds, beloved wife. "Would you prefer not to visit there?" Joseph asked, noting her hesitation. "It's your choice," Eleanor replied honestly. "I have no wish to intrude on private grief." He considered this, then offered his arm. "Come, there's no ghost to disturb." The chapel interior was cool and dimly lit, with simple stained glass casting colored patterns across the wooden pews. Joseph led her through a side door to the cemetery, where perhaps a dozen headstones stood in neat rows. Catherine's grave was well tended, with fresh flowers in a stone vase. The headstone gave her dates. She had been just 32 when she died, and bore the inscription, "In love and memory until we meet again." Joseph stood silent beside the grave, his expression contemplative rather than anguished. After a moment, he spoke quietly. "8 years is a long time to live with memories alone," he said. Catherine was the love of my youth, and her loss nearly destroyed me. But life continues, Miss Mitchell, whether we wish it to or not. Eleanor understood grief's persistence all too well. Does the town expect you to remain forever faithful to her memory? Some do, he admitted, particularly Catherine's friends and family. They've introduced numerous suitable young women over the years, all from good local families, all properly accomplished and unblemished. His emphasis on the last word was subtle, but unmistakable. And yet you chose to seek a bride elsewhere, Eleanor observed. I chose to seek a partner without preconceptions or local entanglements, he corrected gently. Someone who might see me as I am now, rather than as an extension of Catherine, or merely the owner of Elmwood. They returned to the house in thoughtful silence. Eleanor found herself revising her assessment of Joseph Reynolds. Behind his practical, businesslike exterior lay depths she hadn't anticipated, a capacity for both profound love and the wisdom to recognize when mourning must give way to living. After luncheon, served in a sunny breakfast room overlooking the gardens, Joseph's carriage carried them into Millbrook proper. The town centre featured a town hall, several churches, a bank, and a variety of shops, catering to both practical needs and modest luxuries. People nodded respectfully to Joseph. As the carriage passed, their curious gazes inevitably shifting to Eleanor. Millbrook thrives on polite gossip, Joseph said, noting her discomfort. Your arrival has provided ample fodder for speculation. The best approach is to face it directly, rather than hide. The carriage stopped before a shop with Wilson's fine dressmaking painted in elegant script on the window. Joseph helped Eleanor descend, his hand steady beneath her elbow. Mrs. Wilson proved to be a plump, energetic woman in her 50s, who greeted Joseph with familiar respect and regarded Eleanor with undisguised curiosity. To her credit, her gaze lingered on Eleanor's scar for only a moment before focusing on potential fabric and style selections. Mr. Reynolds mentioned you'll need a complete wardrobe, Miss Mitchell, Mrs. Wilson said, guiding Eleanor toward the back of the shop where fabric samples were displayed. For all seasons and occasions. I'm sure something modest will suffice, Eleanor replied, overwhelmed by the array of materials before her. Mrs. Wilson exchanged a glance with Joseph, who had seated himself discreetly near the door with a newspaper. Mr. Reynolds was quite specific about the requirements, the dressmaker said firmly. 3-day dresses, 2 walking costumes, an evening gown, appropriate undergarments, and winter outerwear at minimum, with alterations to existing garments if necessary. Before Eleanor could protest, another customer entered the shop, a fashionably dressed woman perhaps a few years older than Eleanor, accompanied by a younger woman who shared her features. "Mr. Reynolds!" the older woman exclaimed. "What a pleasant surprise to find you here." Joseph rose, offering a polite bow. "Mrs. Harding, Miss Harding, how do you do?" "Quite well, thank you." Mrs. Harding's gaze shifted to Eleanor, sharp with assessment. "And who might this be?" "May I present Miss Eleanor Mitchell, who recently arrived from London," Joseph said smoothly. "Miss Mitchell, Mrs. Victoria Harding, and her daughter, Miss Emily Harding." Eleanor inclined her head politely, conscious of both women staring openly at her scar. "London? How interesting," Mrs. Harding remarked, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "Are you visiting relatives in Millbrook, Miss Mitchell?" Before Eleanor could respond, Joseph intervened. "Miss Mitchell is staying at Elmwood as my guest. We're becoming acquainted with a view toward marriage." The blunt statement dropped into the shop like a stone into still water. Mrs. Harding's mouth formed a perfect O of shock, while her daughter's complexion flushed crimson. Mrs. Wilson busied herself with fabric samples, though her ears were visibly attentive. "I see," Mrs. Harding managed after a moment. "That's unexpected. We hadn't heard you were seeking companionship, Joseph." "I prefer to conduct my personal affairs privately, Victoria," he replied, his tone pleasant but firm. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Miss Mitchell has a fitting scheduled." With tight smiles and murmured farewells, the Hardings departed, though not before Mrs. Harding cast a final assessing look at Eleanor. "Well," Mrs. Wilson said into the ensuing silence, "shall we take your measurements, Miss Mitchell?" The fitting proceeded efficiently, with Eleanor standing on a small platform, while Mrs. Wilson circled her with a measuring tape, calling out numbers to an assistant who noted them in a ledger. Joseph remained in the shop, but gave them privacy by focusing intently on his newspaper. "Mrs. Harding seemed surprised by our arrangement," Eleanor observed quietly, as Mrs. Wilson measured her waist. The dressmaker's hands paused momentarily. Mrs. Harding had hopes that Mr. Reynolds might develop an interest in her daughter, she confided, keeping her voice low. Many in town assumed the same, given Emily's family connections and her conventional attributes. The emphasis on conventional was delicate but clear. Unlike Eleanor, Emily Harding possessed a flawless complexion and the advantage of local social standing. "I see," Eleanor murmured, a familiar heaviness settling in her chest. She was once again an interloper, disrupting established expectations. Mrs. Wilson patted her arm sympathetically. "Pay it no mind, my dear. Mr. Reynolds knows his own mind, always has." With measurements complete and fabric selections made, with more input from Mrs. Wilson than Eleanor, who found herself deferring to the dressmaker's experience with local customs, they prepared to depart. Joseph settled the account discreetly, while Eleanor examined glove options in another part of the shop. The first items should be ready within the week, Mrs. Wilson assured them at the door. The more complex pieces will follow thereafter. Back in the carriage, Eleanor found herself uncharacteristically agitated. The encounter with the Hardings had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. "I apologize if my directness with Mrs. Harding caused you discomfort," Joseph said as they drove toward the town's small park. "Victoria has been attempting to matchmake between Emily and myself for the past 2 years. I thought clarity would be kinder than allowing false hopes to persist." "It's not that," Eleanor said slowly, trying to articulate her unease. "It's the realization that my presence disrupts existing social patterns. I've never been one to court controversy." Joseph directed the driver to stop at the park entrance. "Would you care for a short walk? The afternoon is pleasant and the park offers some tranquility." The park was indeed tranquil, with mature trees shading winding paths and a small pond at its center. A few other people strolled or sat on benches, nodding politely as Joseph and Eleanor passed. "To address your concern," Joseph said as they walked, "any change in my domestic arrangements would cause a stir, regardless of who was involved. Millbrook is a small community with a long memory. Catherine was well loved, and many feel protective of her legacy." "Including the Hardings?" Eleanor inquired. "Victoria was Catherine's cousin," Joseph acknowledged. "She feels a particular investment in my continued status as the grieving widower, I think. But that role has become limiting." They paused beside the pond, where ducks glided serenely across the surface. A thoughtful silence stretched between them. "May I ask you something, Mr. Reynolds?" "Joseph, please," he corrected gently. "And yes, you may ask anything." Eleanor turned to face him directly, abandoning her usual habit of positioning her scarred side away from companions. "Why did you really choose me? There must have been other honest, practical women who responded to your advertisement. Women without—" She gestured to her face. Joseph considered her question with the seriousness it deserved, his gaze steady. "Do you know what struck me most about your letter, Miss Mitchell? Not your honesty about your scar, though that was refreshing. It was that you described yourself completely. your skills, your education, your circumstances, before mentioning what you clearly consider your defining characteristic. He gestured toward a nearby bench, and they sat, a proper distance apart. I recognized something in that approach, a determination to be seen as a complete person, rather than as a single attribute or circumstance. After Catherine died, I became nothing more than the widower to most of Millbrook. My entire existence is reduced to that one fact. Understanding dawned. You saw a kindred spirit, Eleanor said softly. Precisely, Joseph confirmed. Someone who understands what it means to be defined by others through a single lens. Your scar, my grief, both visible markers that people use to categorize and simplify us. It was a perspective Eleanor had never considered. Her scar had always been a barrier, a flaw to be minimized or overcome. The notion that it might forge a connection through shared experience was novel and strangely comforting. I don't wish to be a source of discomfort for your community, she said after a moment, or a cause of gossip and speculation. Millbrook will adjust, Joseph replied with quiet confidence. Those whose opinions matter will see beyond initial impressions, just as I hope to do with you. And those whose opinions don't matter. A rare smile transformed his serious features. They provide entertainment when conversation lags at dinner parties. The unexpected humor startled a laugh from Eleanor, a rusty sound she barely recognized as her own. When had she last laughed genuinely? Years, perhaps. As they continued their walk, their conversation shifted to more practical matters. The operation of Elmwood, Joseph's business interests, Eleanor's experience with household management. By the time they returned to the carriage, Eleanor felt more settled. The encounter with the Hardings relegated to proper perspective. Their final stop before returning to Elmwood was the town's small but well-stocked bookshop. Joseph explained that he ordered books regularly from Boston and New York, but patronized the local establishment for more immediate literary needs. Please, select anything that interests you, he encouraged as they browsed the shelves. Reading. Material is a necessity, not a luxury. Especially as winter approaches, Eleanor ran her fingers lightly over leather-bound spines, savoring the smell of paper and binding glue. Books had been her refuge throughout difficult years. Borrowed from employers or rented for pennies from circulating libraries. The thought of selecting volumes freely without concern for cost was intoxicating. She chose modestly, despite Joseph's urging, a volume of poetry, a novel she had heard praise but never read, and a practical guide to American household management that might prove useful, regardless of how her situation with Joseph evolved. As the shopkeeper wrapped her selections, the bell above the door announced another customer. Eleanor turned to find a dignified older gentleman regarding Joseph with pleased surprise. "Joseph Reynolds! Twice in 1 week. The shop is honored," the gentleman declared, clasping Joseph's hand warmly. "Dr. Matthews," Joseph replied with evident respect. "May I present Miss Eleanor Mitchell? Miss Mitchell, Dr. William Matthews, Millbrook's physician and my personal friend." Unlike the Hardings, Dr. Matthews betrayed no surprise at Eleanor's scarred appearance. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine. "A pleasure, Miss Mitchell. New to our little community, are you?" "Miss Mitchell arrived from London yesterday," Joseph explained. Understanding flickered in the doctor's eyes, but his manner remained cordial. "Then welcome to Millbrook. I hope you'll find our town hospitable, despite its modest size compared to London." "Thank you, Doctor," Eleanor replied, warming to his straightforward manner. "Everyone has been most kind thus far." Dr. Matthews selected a medical journal from a nearby shelf. "Joseph, perhaps you and Miss Mitchell would join Martha and me for dinner later this week. Nothing formal, just a quiet evening among friends." The invitation, so casually extended, signaled acceptance in a way that elaborate protestations could not have achieved. Eleanor glanced at Joseph, uncertain how to respond to this social overture. "We would be delighted," Joseph answered for them both. Perhaps Saturday, if that suits. Plans were made, farewells exchanged, and soon they were heading back to Elmwood as afternoon faded toward evening. Eleanor sat quietly, processing the day's encounters, the hostile assessment of Mrs. Harding, the professional respect of Mrs. Wilson, and the simple acceptance of Dr. Matthews. "Dr. Matthews seems like a good man," she observed as the carriage turned into Elmwood's drive. "One of the best," Joseph agreed. "He attended Catherine throughout her illness and has been a steady friend since. His wife Martha is equally estimable. You'll like her, I think." The mention of Catherine's illness sparked Eleanor's curiosity, but she hesitated to pry into such personal matters so soon. Joseph seemed to read her thoughts. "Consumption," he said quietly. "A gradual decline over 2 years. Dr. Matthews did everything possible, but in the end," he left the sentence unfinished, the conclusion obvious. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said simply. Joseph nodded acknowledgement as the carriage stopped before Elmwood's entrance. As he helped her descend, his hand lingered briefly on hers, a momentary connection that sent an unexpected warmth through Eleanor's veins. "Thank you for accompanying me today," he said formally as they entered the house. "I hope it wasn't too overwhelming." Eleanor considered the question honestly. "It was educational," she replied. "A necessary introduction to what life here might entail. And your impressions?" His tone was casual, but Eleanor sensed the question's importance. She met his gaze directly. "Millbrook seems like a pleasant community, though I suspect integration would require patience on all sides. As for our arrangement, I remain open to possibilities." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. "As do I, Miss Mitchell, as do I." As she prepared for dinner that evening, changing into one of her better dresses with Lily's assistance, Eleanor reflected on the day's revelations. Joseph Reynolds was more complex than she had initially assessed. A man shaped by love and loss, seeking not replacement but renewal. Whether she could or should be part of that renewal remained uncertain, but for the first time in years, Eleanor found herself looking forward rather than back. The scarred woman in the mirror looked different somehow, still marked by the past, but perhaps not defined by it. Not completely. Not anymore. The following days established a rhythm at Elmwood. Mornings found Eleanor learning the household routines from Mrs. Parker, who proved a willing if somewhat reserved instructor. The housekeeper maintained a professional demeanor, neither overly friendly nor hostile, but Eleanor sensed her protective attitude toward both Joseph and Elmwood itself. "Mr. Reynolds likes his coffee strong but not bitter," Mrs. Parker explained as they reviewed the kitchen operations. "And he prefers the morning room for breakfast unless business guests are present." Eleanor absorbed these details attentively. Regardless of how her situation with Joseph evolved, understanding the household's functioning would serve her well. She had managed employers' homes before, though none as grand as Elmwood. "The household accounts," Mrs. Parker continued, producing a leather-bound ledger. "Mr. Reynolds reviews them monthly, but the day-to-day management has fallen to me since Mrs. Reynolds passed. Perhaps you'd like to examine them?" The offer represented a subtle test. Eleanor recognized it as such, but accepted the ledger without hesitation. "Thank you. I'd appreciate understanding how Elmwood's resources are allocated." Mrs. Parker's expression revealed nothing, but she nodded approvingly. "Very good, miss. I'll answer any questions you might have." Afternoons were often spent with Joseph when his business allowed. He showed her his furniture factory on the 3rd. and Day, a modern facility employing nearly 50 workers on the outskirts of town. The foreman, Mr. Daniels, greeted them at the entrance, his weathered face betraying only momentary surprise at Eleanor's appearance before focusing on Joseph. "Production is on schedule for the Boston order," Mr. Daniels reported as they toured the factory floor, and the new designs for the New York showroom are nearly complete. Joseph nodded, asking questions that revealed his thorough understanding of both craftsmanship and commerce. Eleanor watched him interact with the workers, noting how he addressed each by name, inquiring after families or commenting on particular pieces they were crafting. "You're well respected here," she observed as they left the factory. "They seemed genuinely pleased to see you, not merely deferential." Joseph looked surprised at her comment. "I try to create fair conditions. Many of these men have worked for me for years. Some since I expanded beyond a small workshop. Their skill makes my success possible." "Not all employers recognize that connection," Eleanor replied, thinking of harsh London factories where workers were treated as disposable components. "Perhaps that's why they're employers rather than business partners," Joseph mused. "I've found mutual respect yields better results than rigid hierarchy." On the fourth day, Eleanor received her first delivery from Mrs. Wilson, 2 day dresses and various undergarments. The craftsmanship surpassed anything Eleanor had owned before. The fabric's finer, the stitching impeccable. "These are beautiful," she told Lily, as the maid helped her try on a dark blue dress that complemented her auburn hair. "Mrs. Wilson is very skilled." "She is, miss," Lily agreed, adjusting the fall of the skirt. "And these suit you wonderfully. Mr. Reynolds has excellent taste." The comment, innocent as it was, reminded Eleanor of her dependent position. Joseph was providing these clothes out of practical necessity, but also out of kindness. A kindness she hadn't expected and wasn't entirely comfortable accepting. That evening at dinner, Eleanor wore a blue dress. Joseph's appreciative glance, when she entered the dining room, sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Mrs. Wilson's work suits you," he commented as he held her chair. "It's very fine," Eleanor agreed, "but I fear the expense must be considerable." Joseph took his seat opposite her. "Consider it an investment in practicality. New England winters demand appropriate attire, regardless of our future arrangements." The reminder of their temporary agreement hung between them. Nearly a week had passed of their agreed-upon month. Eleanor found herself increasingly comfortable at Elmwood, but the fundamental question remained unresolved. "Have you given thought to those arrangements?" she asked directly, surprising them both with her forthrightness. Joseph considered the question thoughtfully. "I have," he admitted, "though I'd prefer not to rush to conclusions before you've experienced more of what life here entails." "Including dinner with the Matthews tomorrow evening?" Eleanor inquired. "Among other social realities," Joseph agreed with a small smile. "You've met the household and observed my business. The community represents another significant aspect of life here." Eleanor nodded understanding. Social acceptance would indeed be crucial for any long-term arrangement. The anticipated dinner with Dr. Matthews and his wife would provide her first real test in Millbrook society. Saturday evening arrived with a light drizzle that turned the autumn leaves slick and shimmering. Eleanor dressed with particular care, in her new green dress, which Mrs. Wilson had delivered that morning. The rich emerald shade complemented her coloring, and the cut cleverly drew attention to her good features while minimizing focus on her scarred cheek. "You look lovely," Joseph said simply when she descended the stairs to the entrance hall where he waited. He himself was handsomely attired in a dark suit that emphasized his tall, lean frame. The Matthews home proved to be a comfortable residence not far from the town center, smaller than Elmwood but tastefully appointed. Martha Matthews, a serene woman with silver-streaks dark hair, greeted them at the door with genuine warmth. "Welcome, my dear," she said, taking Eleanor's hands in hers. "William has spoken of nothing else since meeting you at the bookshop." Dr. Matthews appeared behind his wife, smiling broadly. "Only because Martha demanded every detail, I assure you. Come in, come in. The weather's turning nasty." The evening unfolded with unexpected ease. the Matthews made no reference to Eleanor's scar beyond Dr. Matthews's professional observation that it appeared to be a well-healed burn injury. Instead, conversation ranged from local matters to wider topics including literature, music, and even politics, though Mrs. Matthews humorously declared the latter subject banned during dessert. "Tell us about London, Miss Mitchell," Mrs. Matthews urged as they retired to the parlour after dinner. "I've never travelled abroad, though William keeps promising a grand tour next year." Eleanor described London's landmarks and peculiarities, carefully evading details of her personal circumstances there. Joseph, she noticed, watched her attentively. Throughout her account, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. As the evening concluded, Dr. Matthews drew Joseph aside while Mrs. Matthews helped Eleanor with her wrap. "You've been in Millbrook less than a week, but I feel we've known you much longer," Mrs. Matthews confided. "Joseph seems lighter in your company, more like his old self before Catherine's illness." Uncertain how to respond to this observation, Eleanor simply smiled. "You've been very kind to welcome me so warmly." "Kindness has nothing to do with it," Mrs. Matthews replied firmly. "We judge by character, not circumstance or appearance. Remember that as you encounter others in town who may be less discerning," the warning was gentle but clear, "not all of Millbrook would be as accepting as the Matthews." On the carriage ride home, rain pattered against the roof while lanterns swung, casting shifting shadows across Joseph's thoughtful face. "You enjoyed the evening?" he asked. "Very much," Eleanor replied honestly. "The Matthews are exceptional people." "They are indeed," Joseph agreed. "Their friendship sustained me through Catherine's illness and after. Their acceptance of you speaks volumes." The carriage rounded a bend in the road, and suddenly Elmwood came into view, windows glowing with welcoming light against the darkness. Something tightened in Eleanor's chest at the sight, a sensation dangerously close to homecoming. Sunday brought church services, which Eleanor approached with trepidation. The white-clappered church in the town centre would provide her most public appearance yet, and first impressions would be difficult to overcome. "We needn't attend if you prefer to wait," Joseph offered as their carriage approached the church, where parishioners were already gathering. Though absence would likely generate more speculation than presence, Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "I've never hidden from stares, Mr. Reynolds. I don't intend to start now." His expression warmed. "With approval." "Joseph, please, I believe we've progressed beyond such formality, at least in private." The reminder of growing intimacy flustered Eleanor momentarily, but she composed herself as the carriage stopped. "Joseph, then," she agreed softly. As expected, their entrance caused a ripple of reaction through the congregation. Heads turned, whispers circulated. Eleanor felt the familiar weight of scrutiny, but kept her chin lifted, her gaze steady. Joseph guided her to a pew near the front, seemingly oblivious to the attention they generated. The minister, Reverend Thomas Clark, was a thoughtful man whose sermon on acceptance and divine love seemed particularly apt. Eleanor wondered if he had chosen the topic specifically for this Sunday, knowing she would be present. After the service concluded, Joseph led her into the inevitable gauntlet of introductions. Some parishioners were openly curious, others politely reserved. Mrs. Harding and her daughter acknowledged them with tight smiles before making a pointed departure. But others, particularly those who worked for Joseph or had business dealings with him, made genuine efforts at welcome. "Miss Mitchell, how lovely to meet you." Mrs. Wilson greeted her warmly, accompanied by a thin man she introduced as her husband. "The green suits you perfectly, just as I thought it would." A few younger women approached with shy smiles, introducing themselves as daughters of local merchants or professionals. Their initial discomfort with Eleanor's scar visibly eased as conversation progressed to typical topics: the weather, the sermon, upcoming town events. "The Harvest Festival is next weekend," explained one young woman, Amanda Porter, whose father owned the town's largest general store. There's dancing and games and the most wonderful food. You must convince Mr. Reynolds to attend. He usually makes an appearance, but never stays for the dancing. By the time they returned to Elmwood, Eleanor felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. The morning had been a series of small challenges met and largely overcome. Not everyone had been welcoming, but enough had been cordial to suggest that integration into Millbrook society might eventually be possible. "You handled that admirably," Joseph commented, as they enjoyed a light luncheon on the terrace, taking advantage of a break in the rain. "Many in your position would have found such scrutiny overwhelming." Eleanor sipped her tea thoughtfully. "When you've been stared at since childhood, you develop certain defenses." "May I ask about the fire?" Joseph inquired gently. "You mentioned it claimed your family home, but little else." Eleanor set down her cup, the familiar ache of memory rising in her chest. "It happened when I was 11. A lamp overturned in the library where my father often worked late. By the time the alarm was raised, the main staircase was engulfed." She paused, steadying her voice. "My parents and younger brother were trapped upstairs. I was discovered on the lawn, unconscious, with no memory of how I escaped." "And the scar?" Joseph prompted softly. "A falling beam. The doctors said I was fortunate, a few inches difference, and I would have lost my eye or my life." Her fingers traced the familiar ridged tissue. The physical pain eventually subsided. Other aspects proved more enduring. Joseph's expression held understanding rather than pity. "Loss reshapes us, but it need not define us forever." The simple statement, delivered without platitudes or false comfort, eased something long knotted within Eleanor. Here was someone who understood grief's permanence while rejecting its tyranny. The rain returned that afternoon, confining them to the house. Joseph showed Eleanor the library, a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling shelves and comfortable reading nooks near tall windows. Unlike the formal parlors used for entertaining, this room showed signs of regular use. "This is my sanctuary," Joseph explained, running his fingers along leather-bound spines. "Catherine loved poetry. I preferred history and philosophy. We spent many evenings here, reading in companionable silence." Eleanor approached a chess set positioned near one window, pieces arranged mid-game. "You play?" "When I can find a worthy opponent," Joseph replied with a hint of challenge. "Do you know the game?" "My father taught me," Eleanor admitted, "though I haven't played in many years. Shall we test your memory?" Joseph gestured toward the chairs flanking the chess table. They played through the rainy afternoon, the steady patter of raindrops on the windows providing gentle accompaniment to the click of chess pieces. Eleanor's skills proved rusty but quickly refreshed, while Joseph played with strategic patience. "Checkmate," he announced after their second game, his knight trapping her king against the board's edge. Eleanor studied the position, acknowledging defeat with a graceful nod. "Well played, though I suspect you showed mercy at several junctures." Joseph's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Strategy sometimes requires apparent retreat before advancement." A third game. As they reset the pieces, their fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected jolt through Eleanor's hand. She glanced up to find Joseph watching her, his expression unreadable. "I've enjoyed these days, Eleanor," he said quietly. "More than I anticipated." The use of her given name, the first time he had employed it, caught her off guard. "As have I," she admitted, surprised by her own honesty. Something shifted between them in that moment, a subtle realignment of possibilities. Before either could speak further, however, Mrs. Parker appeared at the library door. "Mr. Reynolds, there's an urgent message from the factory. Mr. Daniels says there's been an accident." Joseph rose immediately, his expression darkening with concern. Please excuse me, Eleanor. I must attend to this. Left alone in the library, Eleanor found her thoughts in unexpected turmoil. The day's conversations had revealed new dimensions to Joseph Reynolds and to her own evolving feelings toward him. What had begun as a practical arrangement was developing emotional complications she hadn't foreseen. Later that evening, Joseph returned to Elmwood looking weary. He found Eleanor in the smaller family parlor, reading by lamplight. "How serious was the accident?" she asked, setting aside her book. "A collapsed shelving unit," Joseph replied, sinking into a chair opposite her. "2 men injured, though not critically, thank God. They've been seen by Dr. Matthews and should recover fully. I've arranged for their wages to continue during convalescence." "That's very generous," Eleanor observed. Joseph shook his head. "It's simple justice. They were injured while working for me. Their families shouldn't suffer financial hardship as a result." His obvious concern for his workers' welfare added another facet to Eleanor's understanding of his character. Joseph Reynolds was a man of principle as well as practicality, a rare combination in her experience. "You're tired," she noted, rising. "I should let you rest." "Stay, please," Joseph requested, surprising them both, "unless you prefer to retire." Eleanor resumed her seat, oddly pleased by his desire for her company despite his evident fatigue. "I'm not tired yet. The rain makes me restless." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the parlor warm and intimate in the lamplight. Eventually Joseph spoke again, his tone thoughtful. "We've passed the first week of our arrangement, Eleanor. I find myself reluctant to consider its potential conclusion." Her heartbeat quickened at this indirect acknowledgement of deepening connection. "As do I," she confessed softly. "The practical aspects seem promising," Joseph continued carefully. "You've adapted well to Elmwood, shown interest in its operations, and begun establishing connections in town. But practicality alone isn't a sufficient foundation for marriage." Eleanor appreciated his directness. "What else do you seek, Joseph?" He considered the question seriously. "Companionship, mutual respect, shared purpose. Perhaps in time, genuine affection." His gaze met hers steadily. "And you, what do you require beyond security?" The question deserved honest reflection. For so long, Eleanor's existence had focused on mere survival. The luxury of wanting more had seemed beyond reach. "Respect," she said finally. "The space to become something beyond what circumstance has made me. And yes, affection given and received without obligation or pity." Joseph nodded slowly, understanding. "Reasonable desires and aligned with my own." He paused, choosing his words with care. "I'd like to amend our arrangement, if you're willing." "In what way?" Eleanor asked, curious. "Let's discard the arbitrary timeline," he suggested. "Instead of forcing a decision at month's end, let's allow our acquaintance to develop naturally. You remain at Elmwood as my guest for as long as you wish, with no obligation beyond honest communication about your feelings and intentions." The offer was generous, perhaps excessively so. "And your community's expectations?" "There will be in talk if I remain here indefinitely, without a formal arrangement." Joseph's smile held a touch of mischief. "Let them talk. Millbrook's gossips require regular nourishment, and we might as well provide it." Eleanor couldn't help but laugh at his irreverence. "You're more rebellious than you appear, Mr. Reynolds." "Perhaps I've simply reached an age where others' expectations hold less sway than my own happiness," he replied. "Will you consider my proposal?" She did consider it, recognizing both opportunity and risk in this open-ended arrangement. The path forward offered no certainties, but something potentially more valuable: the freedom to choose based on genuine feeling rather than necessity. "I accept," Eleanor said finally. though I insist on contributing to the household in meaningful ways while I remain. I've never been comfortable with idleness." "Agreed," Joseph replied warmly. "Mrs. Parker would welcome assistance with household management, and I suspect Elmwood could benefit from a woman's perspective after years of bachelor austerity." As their conversation turned to lighter topics, Eleanor felt a curious lightness. For the first time in memory, her future contained possibilities beyond mere survival. Whether those possibilities included becoming Mrs. Reynolds remained uncertain, but the question itself now held promise rather than anxiety. Outside, the rain continued, but within Elmwood's walls, something delicate and hopeful had taken root. As fragile yet persistent as the first green shoot after winter's harshest frost, October gave way to November, bringing frost-rimmed mornings and the occasional snow flurry. As the landscape transformed, so too did Eleanor's place at Elmwood. What had begun as a tentative arrangement evolved into something approaching partnership as she gradually assumed responsibilities within the household. Mrs. Parker, initially reserved, now sought Eleanor's input on weekly menus and household purchases. Lily no longer seemed startled by Eleanor's scarred appearance, chatting freely as she helped with Eleanor's increasingly elegant wardrobe. Even the gardener, Mr. Thompson, consulted her about winter preparations for the gardens after discovering her knowledge of plants. The letter arrived on a particularly cold Tuesday morning, London postmarks declaring its origin. Eleanor recognized the handwriting immediately. Beatrice, one of her shipmates from the Atlantic crossing. "News from home?" Joseph inquired as she opened the envelope at the breakfast table, his voice carefully neutral. "From one of the women who traveled with me," Eleanor explained, scanning the closely written pages. "She reached California and married her intended husband. Happy news, I hope." Eleanor's expression grew troubled as she continued reading. "Mixed. Her Thomas indeed had a house as promised, but it's a rough cabin far from town. The work is harder than expected, and the isolation is difficult." She looked up, meeting Joseph's gaze. "She asks if I've married you yet, or if I'm still evaluating prospects." Joseph's lips quivered in a small smile. A diplomatic phrasing. "And what will you tell her?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. 3 weeks had passed since their agreement to set aside arbitrary timelines, but they had not explicitly discussed how to define their evolving relationship. "I'll tell her I remain at Elmwood as your guest," Eleanor replied carefully, "and that my future remains open to possibility rather than fixed by necessity." Joseph nodded approval. "Truthful without oversharing, though I suspect most would consider our arrangement highly improper by now. Most haven't experienced the luxury of choice," Eleanor observed, returning to her breakfast. "Beatrice married Thomas the day after arriving in Sacramento because she had nowhere else to go. Now she endures isolation and hardship because alternatives are worse, while you retain freedom to accept or decline," Joseph noted. "Does that freedom feel valuable, Eleanor?" The question was earnest, not rhetorical. Eleanor considered it seriously. "Beyond measure," she finally said. "I've spent most of my life conforming to others' expectations or requirements simply to survive. The space to make decisions based on genuine feeling rather than desperation is unfamiliar, but precious." Something in Joseph's expression softened. "Then we continue as we are for now, society's opinions notwithstanding." The Millbrook Harvest Festival arrived the following weekend, transforming the town square into a celebration of autumn bounty. Stalls displayed local produce, preserves and crafts. A small band played folk tunes from a makeshift stage, while children raced through fallen leaves and couples danced on a wooden platform erected for the occasion. "I wasn't sure you'd want to attend," Joseph confessed as their carriage approached the festivities. "Large gatherings can be challenging." "I've faced worse challenges than a community celebration," Eleanor replied with a confidence that surprised even her. The weeks at Elmwood had restored something long dormant, a quiet assurance that had once been natural to her before tragedy and hardship had stripped it away. Their arrival attracted the usual attention, but Eleanor noted a subtle shift in the town's reaction. Where once there had been shock or thinly veiled curiosity about her scar, now there were genuine greetings and inquiries about Elmwood. Her gradual integration into Millbrook life was bearing fruit, largely thanks to the Matthews friendship and Joseph's respected position. Amanda Porter, the merchant's daughter who had extended the festival invitation after church, approached them eagerly. "Miss Mitchell, Mr. Reynolds, I'm so pleased you came. The cider pressing is about to begin, and there's to be a pie competition judged by Reverend Clark." "Who's favored to win?" Joseph inquired with surprising interest. Amanda leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Mrs. Baker usually takes the prize with her apple cranberry, but Mrs. Matthews has entered something with maple this year that smells divine." The easy exchange revealed a side of Joseph that Eleanor had glimpsed only occasionally, a man connected to his community's simple pleasures and friendly competitions. She wondered how long it had been since he had participated fully rather than making the brief, obligatory appearance he had mentioned. They wandered through the festival together, stopping to admire handcrafted woodwork, Joseph commending the craftsman with expert appreciation, and intricate quilts, Eleanor recognizing difficult stitching techniques with professional admiration. Children ran past, occasionally staring at Eleanor's scar before being hushed by parents. But increasingly, Eleanor noticed she was becoming Mr. Reynolds' companion, rather than the scarred woman in the town's perception. "Joseph, Miss Mitchell," Dr. Matthews called, waving them toward a cider press where he took his turn at the large wooden handle. "Come sample the first pressing. Nothing finer on a crisp autumn day." They accepted cups of fresh-pressed cider, sweet and tangy on the tongue. Mrs. Matthews joined them, flushed with excitement from the pie competition. "Third place," she announced with mock disappointment. "Apparently my maple innovation wasn't quite ready to dethrone Mrs. Baker's classic." "Always next year," Dr. Matthews consoled, releasing the cider press to another eager participant. "The dancing begins after luncheon. Will you stay?" Joseph glanced at Eleanor, a question in his eyes. She nodded, surprising herself with her willingness to remain in the public eye longer than necessary. The communal luncheon spread across long tables in the town square, everyone contributing dishes that formed an impressive feast. Eleanor sat beside Joseph, with the Matthews across from them, and various townspeople filling surrounding seats. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on harvest yields, upcoming winter preparations, and gentle local gossip. "The Jenkins baby arrived last night," Mrs. Porter announced to general interest. "A healthy boy, their fifth. Heaven help Sarah Jenkins," someone commented. 5 boys under 10 years old." Eleanor observed the easy camaraderie with a mixture of pleasure and melancholy. How different her life might have been had the fire not stolen her family and future, leaving her marked both physically and socially. These simple community connections had been foreign to her for so long that their renewed possibility felt almost overwhelming. Joseph seemed to sense her emotional tide, his hand briefly touching hers beneath the table, a gesture of understanding. Hidden from public view, the small intimacy steadied her, returning her to the present moment rather than past regrets. After the meal, the band struck up livelier tunes, and couples began forming sets for dancing. Eleanor fully expected to observe, rather than participate, assuming Joseph would maintain his pattern of avoiding the dancing. To her surprise, he turned to her as the music began. "Would you honor me with a dance, Eleanor?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, suddenly conscious of how visible they would be on the dance floor. "I haven't danced in many years," she demurred. Never in American patterns. The steps are simple enough, he assured her, and I find myself unwilling to miss the opportunity. Something in his expression, a blend of hope and vulnerability rarely revealed, made refusal impossible. Eleanor placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her toward the wooden platform. Their appearance among the dancers caused a momentary stir, but the music continued, and other couples made room for them in the set. Joseph guided her through the unfamiliar patterns with patient skill, his hand steady at her waist during turns, his instructions murmured just loud enough for her to hear. Left hand now, circle with your partner, promenade back to place. To Eleanor's surprise, she quickly caught the rhythm of the dance, muscle memory awakening from long dormant social lessons of her youth. There was joy in the movement, in the music, in the simple human connection of dance. You dance very well for someone who claims to avoid it, she observed during a brief pause between figures. Joseph's smile held a hint of mischief. I never said I couldn't dance, only that I generally don't. Why make an exception today? His gaze held hers as the music called them back into motion. Perhaps I finally found a partner worth dancing with. The simple statement, delivered without elaborate courtship or flowery sentiment, warmed Eleanor more than any poetic declaration might have. Joseph Reynolds was not a man of excessive words or grand gestures, but his quiet actions often revealed deeper feelings than speech. They danced 3 sets before retreating to catch their breath. Mrs. Matthews approached, her eyes twinkling with approval. Well, Joseph Reynolds, you've surprised us all today, she commented. I don't believe I've seen you on the dance floor since Catherine was alive, he finished, when she hesitated. Yes, it's been some time. Mrs. Matthews patted Eleanor's hand warmly. Sometimes the right partner makes all the difference. As afternoon mellowed toward evening, lanterns were lit around the square, casting a golden glow over the continuing festivities. Joseph and Eleanor prepared to depart, having stayed considerably longer than either had anticipated. Miss Mitchell! The call came from Amanda Porter, hurrying toward them with something wrapped in cloth. Mother sent this, her preserves won. First prize, and she thought you might enjoy them at Elmwood. Eleanor accepted the gift with genuine thanks, touched by the gesture's simple neighborliness. Please tell your mother they'll be appreciated at breakfast. Her blackberry preserves are superior to any I tasted in London. The girl beamed at the compliment before rejoining her family, leaving Eleanor and Joseph to make their way to the waiting carriage. You've made an impression on the Porters, Joseph observed as they departed the town square. Mrs. Porter is a significant influence among Millbrook's merchants' wives. I merely spoke honestly about her preserves, Eleanor replied. They are exceptional. Nevertheless, you've gained an ally. Slowly but surely, Millbrook begins to see beyond first impressions. The sky darkened as they traveled the familiar road. To Elmwood, stars emerging in the clear autumn night. Eleanor found herself reflecting on the day, not merely its events, but their significance. For perhaps the first time since arriving in America, she had felt not like an outsider or tolerated stranger, but like someone who might eventually belong. Penny for your thoughts, Joseph said softly, noting her contemplative silence. I was thinking about belonging, Eleanor admitted. It's a feeling I'd almost forgotten. Joseph's expression grew thoughtful. Belonging is complex. Part place, part people, part purpose. It can't be manufactured or purchased, only gradually cultivated. Like trust, Eleanor observed, or affection. Precisely. His gaze met hers in the carriage's dim interior. Both require time and genuine foundation. The unspoken question hung between them. Had enough time passed? Had sufficient foundation been laid for what both increasingly seemed to desire? Elmwood welcomed them home with warm lights and a crackling fire in the main parlour. After shedding coats and gloves, they lingered there, neither quite ready for the evening to end, despite the day's activities. "I received correspondence from my Boston office today," Joseph mentioned as they sat before the fire. "Business will require my presence there next week." Eleanor nodded, understanding. "How long will you be away?" 3 days, perhaps 4. He hesitated before continuing. "I'd like you to accompany me, if you're willing." The invitation startled her. "To Boston?" "Yes. You mentioned never having visited a major American city. Boston offers cultural opportunities. Millbrook cannot. Museums, theaters, libraries," and he added with slight hesitation, "I find I would prefer your company to traveling alone." The admission of preference, so simply stated, affected Eleanor deeply. "I would like that," she replied softly, "though I imagine it will generate considerable speculation in Millbrook." Joseph's smile held a touch of amusement. "Undoubtedly, but perhaps we've reached a point where such considerations matter less than our own wishes." The question remained, unasked but increasingly evident. Were they moving toward marriage? Neither had explicitly raised the matter since agreeing to set aside timelines, yet their evolving relationship seemed to progress naturally in that direction. "Mrs. Parker will need to prepare the house for our absence," Eleanor noted tacitly, accepting the invitation. "I'll inform her tomorrow," Joseph agreed. "We'll depart Wednesday morning by train." The Boston journey provided Eleanor's first glimpse of a major American city. Unlike London's ancient maze of streets, Boston presented a blend of colonial heritage and modern ambition. Red brick buildings alongside newer structures, busy harbors filled with ships from around the world, and streets populated with a diversity of residents that Millbrook could not match. Joseph had reserved rooms at the Parker House, an elegant hotel in the city center. Eleanor's accommodation adjoined his own, connected by a shared sitting room that maintained propriety while allowing convenient communication. "The Boston Furniture Exchange is nearby," Joseph explained as they settled into their rooms. "I'll need to attend meetings there tomorrow morning, but I've arranged for a carriage to take you to the public garden and any shops that interest you." "I'd prefer to accompany you," Eleanor surprised herself by saying, "if that wouldn't interfere with your business." Joseph looked pleased by her interest. "Not at all. The exchange can be fascinating, though some might consider it dull compared to Boston's other attractions." "I've spent weeks learning about your household," Eleanor replied pragmatically. "Understanding your business seems equally important." Their evening included dinner at the hotel's renowned restaurant, where Joseph was clearly known and respected. The maître d' greeted him warmly, leading them to a well-positioned table. "Mr. Reynolds, a pleasure to see you again. It's been several months since your last visit." "Thank you, Harrison. May I present Miss Eleanor Mitchell?" The maître d' bowed respectfully to Eleanor, his professional demeanor betraying no reaction to her scarred appearance. "Welcome to Parker's, Miss Mitchell. I hope you'll find your stay with us pleasant." The meal provided exceptional, far surpassing even Elmwood's excellent fare in variety and presentation. Eleanor found herself enjoying not merely the food, but the elegant atmosphere, and most particularly Joseph's relaxed companionship away from Millbrook's watchful eyes. "You seem different here," she observed over dessert. "More at ease, perhaps." Joseph considered this assessment. "In Millbrook, I remained Catherine's widower even after 8 years. Here, I'm simply Joseph Reynolds, businessman and occasional visitor. The absence of history creates a certain freedom." "I understand that entirely," Eleanor replied softly. "To be seen without preconception or predetermined narrative is rare and valuable." Their gazes held across the table, mutual understanding deepening their connection. In that moment, Eleanor realized how profoundly her feelings for Joseph had evolved from cautious assessment to genuine affection and respect. Whether that constituted love remained uncertain, her experience with that emotion was too limited for confidence, but it represented something far beyond their initial practical arrangement. The following day brought immersion in Joseph's business world. The Boston Furniture Exchange occupied a handsome building near the financial district, its interior filled with showrooms displaying furniture from manufacturers throughout New England. Joseph introduced Eleanor to business associates. With simple directness, "Miss Eleanor Mitchell, my guest from Elmwood." No elaborate explanation of their relationship was offered or apparently expected. These men focused on commerce rather than personal matters, treating Eleanor with polite respect while discussing business with Joseph. Eleanor observed him in this environment with growing appreciation. Joseph negotiated confidently but fairly, his reputation for quality and reliability evident in how others deferred to his expertise. Several clients specifically requested Reynolds pieces by name, citing their craftsmanship and durability. "Your father established the business you mentioned?" Eleanor asked as they walked between appointments. "Yes, though on a much smaller scale. He was a cabinet maker from Connecticut who settled in Millbrook because of the abundant hardwoods nearby. I apprenticed under him, then gradually expanded from custom pieces to larger production. You still work with your hands occasionally," Eleanor noted, having observed the subtle calluses that belied his gentleman's appearance. Joseph looked pleased at her perception. "I believe in understanding every aspect of what bears my name. Some designs I still prototype myself before the craftsmen reproduce them." This blend of practical skill and business acumen enhanced Eleanor's respect for Joseph. Unlike many successful men who distanced themselves from the actual work that built their fortunes, he maintained connection to craftsmanship, even as he directed an expanding enterprise. Their afternoons and evenings in Boston brought cultural experiences long absent from Eleanor's life. They visited the Museum of Fine Arts, attended a concert at the music hall, and browsed bookshops where Joseph insisted she select volumes that interested her. At the Boston Athenaeum, surrounded by towering bookshelves and scholarly quiet, Joseph watched Eleanor move through the reading room with evident pleasure. "You belong in such places," he observed softly when she rejoined him. "Your intelligence deserves nourishment beyond what Millbrook can provide." The comment stirred Eleanor's thoughts in unexpected directions. "Does that mean you consider Millbrook limiting? For some, perhaps," he acknowledged. "Catherine occasionally found it so. She was Boston-raised, educated in European traditions. Millbrook sometimes felt provincial to her sensibilities. Yet you remain there rather than relocating." "Your primary residence to Boston," Eleanor noted. Joseph nodded thoughtfully. "Elmwood has been Reynolds' land for 3 generations. The factory employs nearly a tenth of Millbrook's workforce. Responsibility anchors me there as much as preference." He studied her expression carefully. "Would you find such anchoring confining?" The question probed beyond mere preference to future possibilities. Eleanor considered it seriously. "I've never had the luxury of choosing where to put down roots," she replied honestly. "London after the fire was a necessity, not a choice. What I value isn't sophisticated urban life, but purpose and connection. Those can exist anywhere fertile. Ground is cultivated for them." Joseph's expression warmed. "A gardener's perspective, appropriate for Elmwood's potential mistress." The reference to her possible future role lingered between them, neither confirmed nor denied, as they continued their cultural explorations. On their final evening in Boston, approaching their hotel after a performance at the theater, they passed a young couple locked in an embrace beneath a street lamp, oblivious to passers-by. Eleanor glanced away discreetly, but not before noticing Joseph's thoughtful observation of the couple. "Young love," he commented as they entered the hotel. "Intoxicating in its certainty, if occasionally unwise in its hasty decisions." "You sound like a man who speaks from experience," Eleanor ventured. They paused in the sitting room, connecting their chambers, privacy allowing greater candor than public spaces. "Catherine and I married young," Joseph acknowledged. 23 and 20, convinced we understood everything about life and each other. We learned otherwise, of course, as all couples must. "Were you happy?" Eleanor asked softly, then immediately regretted the intrusive question. "Forgive me, that's too personal?" "No, it's a fair question given our circumstances." Joseph sat in one of the sitting room's comfortable chairs, inviting Eleanor to take the other. "We were happy, yes, though not in the uncomplicated way youth imagines happiness. We argued, reconciled, disappointed each other, and exceeded each other's expectations in turn. We grew together rather than apart, which I consider the true measure of a successful marriage." His honesty moved Eleanor deeply. "Thank you for sharing that," she said simply. Joseph leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "Eleanor, our time in Boston has clarified something I've been considering for weeks now. When we return to Elmwood, I would like to discuss changing the nature of our arrangement. If you're amenable," her heartbeat quickened at the implication. "I would welcome such a discussion," she replied carefully. His smile held both relief and anticipation. "Then let's enjoy our final day in Boston tomorrow before returning home to more significant conversations." Home, Eleanor reflected, as she prepared for bed in her adjoining room. Joseph had referred to Elmwood as home, not just his, but implicitly hers as well. The realization brought unexpected emotion welling up within her. Something permanent might be taking shape from what had begun as desperate expediency. Not the passionate, impulsive love of the young couple beneath the street lamp, but something potentially more enduring, a partnership built on mutual respect, growing affection, and clear-eyed understanding of each other's strengths and scars, both visible and hidden. As sleep claimed her, Eleanor's final thoughts weren't of uncertainty or fear, but of possibility. For the first time since childhood, she allowed herself to imagine a future not merely survived, but genuinely lived. The train journey back to Millbrook felt different somehow. Eleanor watched the Massachusetts countryside roll past, its autumn splendor fading toward winter's austerity, aware that she, too, stood at a threshold between seasons of her life. Joseph sat across from her in the private compartment he had secured for their return journey, reviewing business correspondence with quiet concentration. Occasionally he would glance up, meeting her eyes with a small smile before returning to his papers. These wordless exchanges held a comfortable intimacy that required no elaboration. "We'll arrive in time for dinner," he noted, consulting his pocket watch. "I've sent a telegram to Mrs. Parker, so she'll be expecting us." Eleanor nodded, smoothing her traveling dress, one of the new garments from Mrs. Wilson's shop. "I hope our absence hasn't disrupted household routines excessively." "Elmwood functioned adequately before you arrived," Joseph reminded her with gentle humor, "though I suspect Mrs. Parker has missed your organizational assistance this week." The observation acknowledged Eleanor's growing role within the household, no longer merely a guest, but an active participant in its management. Over recent weeks, she had gradually assumed responsibilities traditionally belonging to the mistress of the house, from menu planning to overseeing seasonal cleaning. As the train approached Millbrook Station, Eleanor felt a surprising flutter of anticipation, not anxiety as she might once have expected, but something closer to homecoming. The weeks at Elmwood had transformed her relationship with this small New England town from wary assessment to cautious belonging. Mr. Pierce, Joseph's driver, waited with the carriage, greeting them with respectful efficiency. "Welcome back. Sir, miss, weather's been fair while you were away. No early snow yet." The familiar road to Elmwood never looked more welcoming, the house's solid brick facade and illuminated windows promising comfort after travel. As the carriage rounded the final bend, Eleanor caught herself leaning forward slightly, eager for the first glimpse of what increasingly felt like home. Mrs. Parker greeted them at the door, her usual reserve softened by what might almost be called warmth. "Welcome home, Mr. Reynolds, Miss Mitchell. Dinner will be served in 30 minutes if that suits." "Perfectly, thank you," Joseph replied, handing his hat and coat to the waiting footman. "We'll refresh ourselves and join you in the dining room." As Eleanor climbed the stairs toward her chamber, she noted subtle changes that had occurred during their absence. Fresh arrangements of late autumn foliage in the hallway niches, new beeswax polish on the banisters, the lingering scent of cinnamon and cloves, suggesting holiday preparations had begun. Lily waited in Eleanor's room, ready to help her change from traveling clothes to evening attire. "Did you enjoy Boston, miss?" the young maid inquired as she unfastened Eleanor's dress. "Very much," Eleanor replied, selecting a deep burgundy gown from her expanding wardrobe. "Though I find I'm glad to return to Elmwood's quiet after the city's constant activity." Lily's smile held a hint of knowing. "Mr. Reynolds seemed cheerful at breakfast, mentioning you'd be returning today. He's not usually one to share his thoughts with the staff." The comment, innocent as it was, suggested Joseph's feelings were becoming apparent to the household. Eleanor merely nodded, neither confirming nor denying the implication. Her own emotions remained complex, a blend of growing affection, cautious hope, and lingering wariness born of past disappointment. Dinner proved delicious after the train. Station fare, roast pheasant with wild rice, autumn vegetables, and Mrs. Parker's exceptional apple tart for dessert. Joseph and Eleanor exchanged observations about their Boston experiences, the conversation flowing easily between them. "The factory manager was particularly impressed with your knowledge of wood types," Joseph noted, refilling Eleanor's water glass. "He mentioned it after you examined those cherry samples." "My father's influence," Eleanor explained. "He appreciated fine craftsmanship and taught me to recognize quality materials, though American woods differ somewhat from those commonly used in England." As dinner concluded, Joseph cleared his throat slightly. "Perhaps we might continue our conversation in the library. There's a good fire there tonight." The suggestion carried weight beyond casual evening plans. Both recognized this as the moment for the discussion promised in Boston, the potential redefinition of their relationship. The library welcomed them with dancing firelight, comfortable leather chairs drawn close to the hearth, and the comforting scent of old books. Joseph closed the door, ensuring privacy, then gestured toward the chairs. "Brandy?" he offered, moving toward a crystal decanter on a side table. "Just a small one," Eleanor agreed, gathering her thoughts as she took her seat. Joseph poured two, modest servings, handed one to Eleanor, then settled into the chair opposite hers. For a moment he simply watched the firelight play across her features, his expression thoughtful. "When I placed that advertisement seeking a bride," he began, "finally, I had practical expectations, companionship, household management, perhaps, eventually, children. What I didn't expect was to find someone who would challenge my assumptions about life after Catherine." Eleanor sipped her brandy, letting the liquid's warmth spread through her chest. "And what assumptions were those? That contentment rather than happiness was the most I could hope for," Joseph replied honestly. "That practical arrangement rather than emotional connection would define any new relationship." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze direct. "I was wrong, Eleanor. These past weeks have shown me that life holds more possibilities than I permitted myself to imagine." Eleanor found herself profoundly moved by his candor. "I too had limited expectations," she admitted. "Security and respect seemed ambitious enough goals for someone in my circumstances." "And now?" Joseph prompted gently. She considered the question seriously. "Now I find myself wanting more. Not just the practical benefits of our arrangement, but the emotional ones as well. Your companionship, your perspective, your... She hesitated before finishing softly. Your affection. Joseph's expression warmed. You have it, Eleanor. Perhaps you've had it longer than either of us recognized. He set his glass aside and reached for her hand, his touch gentle but certain. I believe we've moved beyond our original arrangement into something more meaningful. The question now is whether you're ready to formalize that transition. Though anticipated, the implicit proposal still caught Eleanor by surprise. She looked down at their joined hands, his larger one enveloping her more delicate fingers with careful strength. Before you answer, Joseph continued, I want to be clear about what I'm proposing. Not a marriage of convenience or practicality, though those elements remain valid. I'm proposing a true partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. I believe we could build a good life together, Eleanor, one that honors both our pasts while creating something new. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This was no desperate plea or calculated business proposition, but the earnest offer of a man who had thought deeply about their compatibility and potential future. What of Millbrook's expectations? Eleanor asked, needing to address practical concerns. Catherine's memory means much to this community. Catherine would be the first to say life must continue, Joseph replied with quiet certainty. She was practical above all else. As for Millbrook, those who matter already accept you. The rest will adjust or not according to their own limitations. Eleanor withdrew her hand gently, rising to stand before the fire. This moment demanded absolute clarity of thought, not just emotional response. When I came to America, she said slowly, I sought escape from circumstances that offered no future. I had no expectations beyond basic security and perhaps respectful tolerance. She turned to face Joseph, allowing him to see both sides of her face fully in the firelight. I never imagined finding someone who would see beyond this scar to the person beneath it. Joseph stood as well, closing the distance between them with careful steps. Eleanor, your scar is part of what shaped you, but it doesn't define you. Just as Catherine's death influenced but doesn't define me. We are more than our visible and invisible wounds. His hand lifted, hovering near but not touching her scarred cheek, seeking permission. Eleanor nodded slightly, and his fingers gently traced the rigid tissue with tender acceptance. I do not see past your scar, he said softly. I see it clearly, along with everything else that makes you the remarkable woman you are. Your intelligence, your resilience, your unexpected humor, your practical wisdom, all of these compose Eleanor Mitchell, the woman I'm asking to become my wife. The directness of the proposal, finally spoken plainly, brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes. Not from sadness or fear, but from the profound relief of being truly seen and valued. Yes, she whispered, her voice strengthening as she continued. Yes, I will marry you, Joseph. His smile transformed his serious features, revealing the handsome man partially concealed by habitual reserve. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw. If she wished, Joseph leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Not quite a lover's kiss, but more intimate than their previous interactions had allowed. Thank you, he said simply when he drew back, for taking a chance on this unexpected path. They spent the evening discussing practical aspects of their engagement, timing, arrangements, how to announce their intentions to the household and community. Joseph suggested a spring wedding, allowing proper time for preparations and for Eleanor to feel fully settled at Elmwood before assuming the role of Mrs. Reynolds officially. I should write to my solicitor in London, Eleanor noted. There are small matters to resolve regarding my former lodgings and the few possessions I left behind. Of course, Joseph agreed. And I'll speak with Reverend Clark about publishing the banns after we've announced our engagement to the household. The conversation had the comfortable rhythm of partnership, each offering suggestions, considering options, reaching consensus. When Eleanor finally retired for the night, she carried with her a profound sense of having made not just a wise decision, but a right one. Morning brought the task of informing the household. Joseph suggested making the announcement at breakfast to Mrs. Parker, with instructions for her to share the news with the other staff afterward. "Mrs. Parker," Joseph began as the housekeeper served coffee, "Miss Mitchell and I have news that will affect household arrangements going forward." The housekeeper paused, coffee pot in hand, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, sir?" "Miss Mitchell has done me the honor of accepting my proposal of marriage. We plan to wed in the spring." Mrs. Parker's composure cracked slightly, not with disapproval, as Eleanor might have feared, but with what appeared to be relief. "I'm very pleased to hear it, sir. May I offer my congratulations to you both?" "Thank you," Eleanor replied, touched by the woman's evident sincerity. "I'll inform the staff, unless you'd prefer to announce it yourself," Mrs. Parker inquired. Joseph glanced at Eleanor, who shook her head slightly. "Please go ahead," she told the housekeeper, "though perhaps you could ask Lily to come to my room after breakfast. I'd like to speak with her personally." "Of course, miss." Mrs. Parker's expression held new deference. Eleanor was no longer merely a guest, but the future mistress of Elmwood. The transition would require adjustment for everyone, including Eleanor herself. Lily's reaction proved enthusiastically positive. "Oh, miss, I'm so happy for you both," the young maid exclaimed, when Eleanor confirmed the news. "The whole staff has been hoping. That is—" She blushed, realizing she might have revealed too much about below-stairs speculation. "It's all right, Lily," Eleanor assured her with a smile. "I imagine our arrangement has prompted considerable discussion, only because we've all seen how you've brought life back to Elmwood," Lily hurried to explain. "Mr. Reynolds has been different since you arrived, more present somehow, even smiling occasionally." The observation touched Eleanor deeply. She had been so focused on her own adaptation to Elmwood that she hadn't fully recognized how her presence might have affected its master. The next announcement came at Sunday services, where Reverend Clark read the banns for the first time. The reaction among the congregation ranged from surprised murmurs to approving nods. Matthews beamed with obvious pleasure, while Mrs. Harding's tight-lipped expression suggested continued disapproval. "Well, that's done," Joseph commented as they drove home afterward. "The town will have no shortage of conversation topics this week." Eleanor laughed softly. "I suspect opinions are already firmly established. Those who've accepted me will be pleased. Those who haven't will remain doubtful." "Their loss," Joseph replied with unexpected firmness. "Anyone who cannot see your value reveals only their own limitations." Such staunch defense warmed Eleanor's heart. After years of facing judgment for her scarred appearance, having someone stand firmly in her corner felt like a gift beyond measure. Letters of congratulation began arriving within days, some from Joseph's business associates, others from Millbrook residents who had gradually accepted Eleanor's presence in their community. Dr. and Mrs. Matthews sent a beautiful arrangement of winter greenery with their good wishes, while Mr. Porter from the general store presented a hand-carved wooden box that held his wife's prize-winning preserves. "A proper engagement token requires more formality," Joseph said one evening, about a week after their agreement. They sat in the family parlor, where Eleanor worked on correspondence, while Joseph reviewed factory reports. Reaching into his waistcoat pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "This belonged to my grandmother, then my mother, then Catherine. I've had it reset with stones I thought might suit you better." He opened the box to reveal a ring unlike any Eleanor had expected. Rather than a traditional diamond, it featured a deep green emerald flanked by smaller pearls in an elegant gold setting. "I noticed you favor green," Joseph explained as Eleanor stared at the ring in surprise, and pearls seemed appropriate for someone who crossed an ocean to find a new beginning. The thoughtfulness behind the choice moved Eleanor deeply. Not just the selection of stones that complemented her coloring, but the consideration of symbolism and personal preference rather than mere adherence to convention. "It's beautiful," she whispered, as Joseph slipped it onto her finger. "Perfect." Actually, the ring's weight felt strange yet right, a tangible symbol of commitment after years of disconnection. Eleanor found herself turning her hand occasionally throughout the evening, watching how the emerald caught the lamplight. Days melded into weeks as November yielded to December, bringing the first significant snowfall and holiday preparations. Eleanor threw herself into Christmas planning with unexpected enthusiasm, discovering joy in establishing traditions that would become part of their shared future. "Catherine is always decorated with white roses and holly," Mrs. Parker mentioned, hesitantly one morning as they discussed arrangements. Eleanor nodded understanding. "We'll continue that tradition in the formal parlor," she decided, "but perhaps we might try evergreens and pine cones with red ribbons in the family spaces, a blending of old and new." The suggestion satisfied both, respect for the past and creation of something fresh, a balance Eleanor sought in all aspects of her integration into Elmwood life. Joseph observed these small negotiations with evident approval. "You're navigating difficult waters with remarkable skill," he commented one evening as they sat before the library fire. "Finding the line between honoring what came before and establishing your own presence." "It feels important," Eleanor replied, "not just for the household, but for us. Acknowledging Catherine's continued importance in Elmwood's history while creating space for our future together." Joseph reached for her hand, his expression serious. "You're a remarkable woman, Eleanor Mitchell. I find myself increasingly grateful that you answered my advertisement." "Even with my unconventional qualifications?" she asked lightly, gesturing toward her scarred cheek. "Especially with those," he replied with unexpected intensity. "Your scar taught you to see beyond surfaces. Without it, you might never have developed the insight and compassion that define you." The observation silenced Eleanor momentarily. She had always viewed her scar as a burden to overcome, a flaw to be minimized or hidden. The notion that it might have positively shaped her character had never occurred to her. "That's a generous perspective," she managed finally. Joseph shook his head slightly. "Not generous, truthful. We are shaped by our challenges, Eleanor. Mine taught me that grief, though permanent, need not be all-consuming. Yours taught you to value substance over appearance. Together, those lessons create a foundation for understanding that many couples lack." As Christmas approached, Eleanor found herself reflecting often on Joseph's words. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps her scar, rather than merely marking her, had shaped her in ways that ultimately proved valuable. Without it, would she have developed the resilience that sustained her through difficult years? Would she have learned to assess character based on actions rather than appearances? Would she have recognized Joseph's quiet worth beneath his reserved exterior? Such philosophical considerations took practical form in her interactions with Millbrook. Society. The announcement of their engagement had solidified Eleanor's position, transforming her from curious outsider to acknowledged future Mrs. Reynolds. Most accepted this new reality with good grace, though a few holdouts, Mrs. Harding, prominent among them, maintained chilly distance. "Victorian still hopes I'll come to my senses," Joseph remarked with dry amusement after a particularly awkward encounter at the church Christmas bazaar. "She believes she's protecting Catherine's legacy." "And you believe differently?" Eleanor inquired as they examined handcrafted ornaments at one of the stalls. "Catherine would have wanted my happiness above all else," Joseph replied with certainty, just as I would have wanted hers had our situations been reversed. The simple statement revealed volumes about his first marriage, its mutual support, its fundamental health despite inevitable challenges. Eleanor found herself hoping their union might achieve similar balance and generosity of spirit. Christmas Eve brought heavy snow that transformed Elmwood into a winter wonderland. Drifts piled against the windows, trees bent beneath white burdens, and the world beyond the house seemed hushed in reverent expectation. The household gathered for traditional celebrations, staff included in the family parlor festivities, gifts exchanged, carols sung around the piano that Eleanor had recently begun playing again after years of neglect. Joseph watched her fingers move across the keys with evident pleasure, encouraging her rediscovery of old skills and joys. As the evening concluded and staff departed for their quarters, Joseph and Eleanor found themselves alone before the parlor. Fire, the room illuminated only by tree ornaments and dancing flames. "I have something for you," Joseph said, reaching into his pocket. "A Christmas gift, though perhaps also something more." He withdrew not a box, but a folded document. "This transfers half ownership of Elmwood to you. Effective immediately, rather than upon our marriage. The attorneys finalized it yesterday." Eleanor stared at the document in shock. "Joseph, that's not necessary. The usual marriage settlements would be more than—" "This isn't about legal obligation," he interrupted gently. "It's about partnership. I want you to feel Elmwood is truly yours, not just as my wife, but in your own right." The gesture's significance overwhelmed her. Not merely financial security, though that was considerable, but symbolic acceptance and trust beyond conventional arrangements. "I don't know what to say," Eleanor admitted, her fingers tracing the document's official seal. "You need say anything," Joseph replied, taking her hand, "except perhaps tell me whether you're pleased or horrified by my presumption." A laugh escaped her, half amusement, half emotional release. "Pleased beyond words," she assured him, "and humbled by your trust." "Trust is well earned," he said softly. "You've brought Elmwood back to life, Eleanor. Not just the household management, though that's been admirably handled. You've restored light to rooms that had grown shadowed by memory and grief." As snowflakes danced beyond the windows and firelight illuminated their joined hands, Eleanor recognized with sudden clarity how far she had traveled. Not just the ocean crossing from London to Massachusetts, but the emotional journey from isolated survivor to beloved partner. The scarred girl who had boarded the SS Atlantic with desperate hope and little expectation could never have imagined this moment. Not merely acceptance or security, but genuine belonging. Not just a practical arrangement, but a relationship built on mutual respect and deepening love. Joseph's hand tightened gently around hers, his expression reflecting similar thoughts. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor," he said softly. "The first of many we'll share at Elmwood." "Merry Christmas, Joseph," she replied, her heart full with the gift more precious than property deeds or emerald rings, the gift of being truly seen, scars, and all and cherished, not despite but inclusive of everything that made her uniquely herself. Spring arrived in Millbrook with gentle persistence, melting winter's grip day by day. The gardens at Elmwood awakened, crocuses pushing through lingering snow, daffodils unfurling yellow trumpets along the paths, and buds swelling on the apple trees in the orchard. Eleanor stood at the bedroom window, watching the gardeners prepare flower beds for summer blooms. In just 1 week, she would no longer be Miss Eleanor Mitchell, mail-order bride with uncertain prospects, but Mrs. Joseph Reynolds, mistress of Elmwood, and wife to one of Millbrook's most respected citizens. "Everything is proceeding according to schedule, miss," Lily reported, entering with Eleanor's morning tea. "Mrs. Parker says the final deliveries for the reception arrived from Boston this morning." "Thank you, Lily," Eleanor replied, turning, from the window with a smile. "And thank you for your help with the wedding preparations. I couldn't have managed without you." The young maid blushed with pleasure. "It's been my honor, miss. The whole staff is looking forward to the celebration." The wedding plans had evolved naturally over winter months. Not an elaborate society affair, but a meaningful gathering that honored both Eleanor and Joseph's preferences. The ceremony would take place at Millbrook's Church with Reverend Clark officiating, followed by a reception at Elmwood for family, friends, and select community members. Eleanor's gown hung in the dressing room. Not white, which would have seemed inappropriate for a bride of 26, but a soft pearl silk that complemented her coloring while acknowledging her maturity. Mrs. Wilson had outdone herself with the design, creating something elegant yet understated, with clever details that drew attention to Eleanor's graceful neck and auburn hair while minimizing focus on her scarred cheek. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Eleanor, are you decent?" Joseph called. "Come in," she answered, smiling at the continued formality they maintained despite their engagement. Some conventions were worth preserving, they had agreed, at least until marriage. Joseph entered, handsome in his morning suit. "I'm heading to the factory to resolve some final matters before next week. Is there anything you need from town while I'm out?" "Nothing urgent," Eleanor replied. "Though perhaps you could check whether Mr. Porter received those special tea blends. I ordered. Mrs. Matthews mentioned they might arrive today." "Of course." Joseph paused, studying her with warm appreciation. "You look particularly lovely this morning. Anticipation becomes you." The compliment brought a flush to Eleanor's cheeks, still unaccustomed to such direct expressions of admiration, despite months of growing closeness. Their courtship, though not conventional in its beginnings, had developed sweet traditions and growing affection that sometimes surprised them both with its depth. "Will you be home for dinner?" she asked, as he prepared to depart. "Without fail," Joseph promised. "The Matthews are joining us, remember?" The reminder sparked Eleanor's memory. "Yes, of course. Mrs. Parker mentioned setting the table with the blue china." Joseph nodded approval. "Perfect, until evening then." He hesitated briefly, then stepped forward to place a gentle kiss on her forehead, a gesture that had become their customary farewell, affectionate yet restrained in a way that honored their mutual decision to approach physical intimacy with deliberate patience. As spring blossoms unfurled, so too had their relationship developed, not with passionate haste, but thoughtful cultivation. Joseph had proven himself a considerate suitor, respectful of Eleanor's limited experience with courtship. Each small advance in physical affection, a hand held, a kiss bestowed, an embrace shared, came with unspoken permission, sought and granted. After Joseph's departure, Eleanor spent the morning with Mrs. Parker, finalizing wedding reception details. The housekeeper, initially reserved toward Eleanor's presence, had gradually become an ally and supporter. Her knowledge of Elmwood's history and traditions provided invaluable guidance as Eleanor prepared to assume her role as mistress of the estate. "The silver needs additional polishing," Mrs. Parker noted as they inspected table settings, "and I've assigned Lily to arrange fresh flowers the morning of the reception." "Perfect," Eleanor agreed. "And the menu looks excellent, though perhaps we should increase the quantity of Mr. Thompson's favorite almond cakes. He's been so helpful with the special garden arrangements." Mrs. Parker nodded approval at the thoughtful suggestion. "Very considerate, miss. I'll inform the kitchen." In the afternoon, Eleanor walked the gardens alone, mentally mapping where summer plantings would go and which areas required attention after winter's harshness. These quiet moments of planning brought particular satisfaction, evidence of her permanent place at Elmwood and the future she would help shape there. Near the small lake, now free of ice and reflecting blue sky, she paused to watch a pair of swans glide across the water. They moved in perfect synchrony, separate yet connected, much as she and Joseph had learned to do over recent months. "Eleanor!" The call came from Amanda Porter, the merchant's daughter, hurrying along the path from the main house. "I hoped I might find you outdoors. Father sent me the tea order you requested. He received it this morning and thought you might want it immediately rather than waiting for Mr. Reynolds to collect it." "How thoughtful," Eleanor replied warmly, accepting the package. "Thank you for bringing it all this way." Amanda's cheeks were flushed from her brisk walk, or perhaps from excitement, Eleanor realized as the young woman practically bounced with suppressed news. "Is there something else?" Eleanor inquired, amused by the obvious anticipation. "Well," Amanda glanced around conspiratorially, "I really shouldn't say, but Father has ordered something special for your wedding gift from Boston. It arrived yesterday, hidden in a shipment of dry goods." Eleanor laughed at the young woman's enthusiasm. "Then I shall pretend to know nothing about it and express appropriate surprise at the proper time." They walked back toward the house together, Amanda chattering about wedding preparations and community anticipation. Eleanor listened with genuine interest, still marveling sometimes at how completely her position in Millbrook had transformed. From scared outsider to accepted neighbor to respected future Mrs. Reynolds, the journey had unfolded with unexpected grace. "Everyone's talking about your wedding," Amanda confided. "Even Mrs. Harding has ordered a new dress for the occasion, though she still purses her lips whenever your name is mentioned." "Some minds change slowly," Eleanor observed without rancor, "and some never do. Either way, life continues." The philosophy reflected her hard-won wisdom, acceptance that not everyone would see beyond her scar, paired with determination not to let others' limitations constrain her happiness. The Matthews arrived promptly at 6 for dinner, bringing early spring, flowers from their greenhouse and warm conversation. Throughout the meal, Eleanor found herself observing Joseph with quiet appreciation, his thoughtful hosting, his genuine interest in Dr. Matthews's medical updates, his subtle attentiveness to her comfort. How different from their first awkward dinner after her arrival at Elmwood, just 1 week until the wedding, Mrs. Matthews noted as they moved to the parlor for coffee. "Are you finding yourself nervous, my dear?" Eleanor considered the question honestly. "Not nervous exactly," she replied, "more aware of transition. This chapter ends as another begins." "Beautifully expressed," Dr. Matthews commented. "Though I would suggest not separate chapters, but continuous narrative. Your story together began the moment you stepped off that train, whether you recognized it then or not." Joseph, seated beside Eleanor on the settee, reached for her hand with quiet affection. "William's right. Our beginning was unconventional, but no less significant for that." The observation sparked thoughtful conversation about life's unexpected turns, how seemingly random events often revealed purpose in retrospect. Eleanor shared more openly than usual about her journey from London, while Joseph spoke of his gradual emergence from grief's isolating grip. "I believe Catherine would approve," Mrs. Matthews said gently as the evening concluded. "She valued honesty and courage above all else, qualities you both possess in abundance." After their guests departed, Joseph and Eleanor lingered in the parlor, reluctant to end the evening despite its lateness. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 11 as they sat companionably before the dying fire. 1 week, Joseph mused, echoing Mrs. Matthews' earlier comment. "Does that seem surreal to you?" Eleanor smiled at the question. "Less surreal than boarding a ship bound for America to marry a stranger," she replied lightly. "You're hardly a stranger now." "No," he agreed softly. "Not a stranger, but I wonder sometimes if I'll ever know all there is to know about you. You reveal new facets continually." "As do you," she countered. "That's the journey we're choosing, isn't it? Discovery without end." Joseph's expression warmed with appreciation for her insight. "Indeed, an ongoing expedition rather than a destination reached." The philosophical exchange reflected their evolving connection, intellectual as well as emotional, challenging as well as comforting. Eleanor had discovered in Joseph a mind that complemented her own, just as she had found in him a heart that understood her scars, both visible and hidden. Spring sunshine blessed their wedding day, illuminating stained glass windows with jewel-toned light as Eleanor walked alone down the church aisle. She had no family to give her away, but chose to see this not as absence but affirmation. She came to Joseph as her own person, offering herself freely rather than being transferred from one man's protection to another's. Joseph waited at the altar, his expression transforming with wonder as she approached in her pearl silk gown. Reverend Clark smiled benevolently as the couple joined hands before him, their journey from mail-order arrangement to genuine union known to all present. "Dearly beloved," the Reverend began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed church, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls whose path to one another reminds us that God's plans often unfold in unexpected ways." The vows, traditional yet profound, resonated with particular meaning for a couple whose beginning had been anything but conventional. When Joseph placed the gold band on Eleanor's finger to join her emerald engagement ring, his hands were steady, his voice clear with certainty. "With this ring I'm wed." Eleanor's response came from depths of feeling she once thought permanently sealed by tragedy and circumstance. The young girl who had lost everything in a fire, the scarred woman who had survived London's harsh indifference, the desperate traveller who had crossed an ocean seeking mere security, all were present in the confident woman who now pledged herself to partnership with a man who saw her completely and cherished what he saw. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Clark concluded, beaming at the couple before him. Joseph's kiss, their first shared publicly, conveyed tender reverence rather than passionate display, appropriate to both their natures and the sacred setting. The congregation's applause accompanied them back down the aisle, now together as they would remain. Sunlight bathed Elmwood's gardens as carriages delivered wedding guests for the reception. Eleanor and Joseph greeted them from the terrace, her hand resting comfortably in the crook of his arm, her scarred cheek visible without shame or concealment. "Mrs. Reynolds," Joseph murmured during a brief moment alone between greetings. "How does your new title feel?" Eleanor considered the question, savoring the reality beneath the formal address. "Like coming home," she replied simply. "Not to a place, but to myself. The self I might have been without tragedy's intervention. Or perhaps," Joseph suggested gently, "exactly the self you were always meant to become, shaped by both sorrow and joy into someone extraordinary." His perspective, that her scars had contributed to rather than detracted from her essential self, remained his greatest gift to her, not blind denial of imperfection, but recognition of how challenge had forged strength, how difference had cultivated compassion. As afternoon stretched toward evening and celebration continued around them, Eleanor found quiet moment to observe their gathered community. The Matthews raising glasses in heartfelt toast, Mrs. Wilson beaming at how perfectly the wedding gown suited her client, Amanda Porter dancing enthusiastically with the young, gardener's assistant, even Mrs. Harding offering grudging congratulations with her daughter Emily beside her. None could have predicted this outcome when the scarred Englishwoman had stepped from the train months earlier. None except perhaps Joseph himself, who had somehow recognized in Eleanor's honest letter the potential for partnership beyond practical arrangement. "Happy?" Joseph asked, returning to her side after speaking with business associates. Eleanor's smile answered before her words could. "Completely. And you?" "More than I believed possible," he replied, his gaze encompassing not just her but their shared domain, the house, the gardens, the gathered community, the future stretching before them. Together, they had transformed what began as desperate advertisement and practical response into genuine connection. The scarred mail-order bride had found not mere acceptance, but profound appreciation. The grieving widower had discovered not a replacement for lost love, but renewal of life's possibilities. What started as an arrangement had blossomed into affection, deepened into respect, and flowered finally into love, not despite their scars and losses, but because of how those challenges had shaped them into people capable of seeing beyond surface to substance, beyond convenience to connection. As evening stars appeared above Elmwood's gardens and guests continued celebrating the unexpected union, Eleanor and Joseph exchanged a glance of quiet understanding. Their journey had only just begun, but its foundation was stronger than either could have imagined when fate and circumstance first brought the scarred mail-order bride to the rich widower's door. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.